The pen had barely left the paper when Daniel Chen realized the signature wasn't his father's. By then, $300 million had already changed hands. Thomas Harrington sat alone in his office on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before the signing. The contract lay open on his desk. 63 pages. Bound in navy leather, gold embossing along the spine that read, Apex Holdings Acquisition Agreement. He'd read it twice already. Legal had reviewed it. Finance had modeled the transition. His board had voted unanimously to approve. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt uneasy. Thomas had built Harrington Industries over 4 decades, started in a rented warehouse with 12 employees and a single government contract. Now the company employed 4,000 people across 6 countries, manufacturing precision components for aerospace and medical technology. It wasn't the largest firm in the sector, but it had something valuable: reputation. Apex Holdings wanted that reputation. They'd approached him 8 months earlier. Casual lunch, 2 representatives from their acquisitions team. Polite questions about his retirement plans, his succession strategy, his vision for the company's future. Thomas had smiled and deflected. He wasn't interested in selling, but they came back. And they brought numbers that made even his CFO pause. $1.8 billion. Full acquisition. Thomas would stay on as advisory chairman for 2 years, then step away with full honors and enough wealth to fund 3 generations. His executive team would receive retention packages. His employees would keep their jobs under Apex's umbrella. It seemed ideal. But there was a clause on page 41. Section 8.3. It dealt with intellectual property transfers and licensing agreements. Standard language, his lawyers assured him. Boilerplate corporate acquisition terms. But something about the wording felt off. Thomas had learned to trust his instincts over the years. They'd saved him from difficult partnerships, warned him away from risky ventures, guided him through recessions and market shifts. This feeling, this quiet discomfort, was familiar. It was the same sensation he'd felt 20 years earlier when a supplier had offered terms that seemed too generous. He'd investigated and discovered the supplier was days from bankruptcy, trying to secure advance payments before collapsing. He picked up his phone and called his son. Daniel Chen had taken his mother's maiden name professionally, a choice Thomas had supported without question. At 34, Daniel ran a small legal consultancy that specialized in contract analysis for mid-sized firms. He had his mother's sharp mind and his father's patience. Thomas trusted his judgment completely. "Can you look at something for me?" Thomas asked. "Always." "I'm sending over a section of a contract. Just want a second opinion before we finalize." "The Apex deal?" "Yes." There was a pause on the other end. Daniel had never been enthusiastic about the acquisition. Not opposed, exactly. Just cautious. He'd attended 2 of the negotiation meetings and had left both times with a thoughtful expression Thomas couldn't quite read. "Send it over," Daniel said. "I'll look tonight." Thomas emailed him Section 8.3, then closed his laptop and went home. He didn't sleep well. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier. The house felt large and empty. He made tea at 2 a.m, thinking about the company, about the people who worked there, the engineers who'd been with him for 20 years, the production managers who knew every machine by sound, the quality control specialists who could spot a defect at a glance. They trusted him to do right by them. Was selling the company doing right by them? Or was it abandoning them? He didn't know anymore. The signing ceremony was scheduled for June 14th at Apex Holdings headquarters. 24 people would attend. Executives from both companies, lawyers, board members, and a small team from Apex's communications department to document the historic moment. Thomas arrived at 9 a.m. wearing his best suit. His assistant, Patricia, who had been with him for 22 years, had pressed it herself the night before. Everyone smiled. Thomas felt cold. Daniel had called him at midnight 3 days earlier. "Dad, we need to talk about Section 8.3. They'd met for breakfast the next morning. Daniel brought his laptop and 3 pages of handwritten notes. He'd also brought a folder containing printouts of 3 other contracts from companies Apex had acquired in the past 5 years. Thomas hadn't asked him to research Apex's acquisition history. Daniel had done it on his own. "This clause," Daniel said, pointing at paragraph 4, "it's not standard." Thomas leaned in. "It says all intellectual property, including pending patents, proprietary processes, and developmental research, transfers to Apex upon acquisition. That's normal. But look at this phrase. Retroactive to all work in progress as of the date of initial negotiation. What does that mean?" "It means anything your company was developing when Apex first approached you 8 months ago becomes theirs retroactively, even if you developed it entirely with your own resources, your own funding before any deal was on the table." Thomas stared at the words. Harrington Industries had 3 major projects in development. One was a revolutionary filtration system for medical implants. Another was a lightweight alloy for aerospace applications. The third was a diagnostic sensor that could detect early-stage equipment failure in surgical instruments. All 3 had been initiated before Apex ever made contact. The filtration system alone had cost $6 million to develop. They'd partnered with 2 university research teams and conducted 18 months of testing. The breakthrough had come 4 months before Apex's initial lunch meeting. Thomas remembered the day his lead engineer had called him with the results. They'd celebrated in the lab. "They're taking everything," Thomas said quietly. "Not just taking," Daniel corrected, "claiming they owned it from the start. If this clause stands, they could argue your company had no right to develop those projects independently. They could sue your partners, freeze your patents, tie up everything in legal proceedings." "Why would they do that?" Daniel met his eyes. "Because those 3 projects are worth more than your company. If they can claim retroactive ownership, they don't just get Harrington Industries. They get control of the entire technological foundation those projects are built on. They could license it, sell it, or restrict it to eliminate competition." He opened the folder and spread out the 3 contracts. "I looked at their other acquisitions. 2 of them had similar clauses. Both companies lost their primary innovations within 6 months of the deal closing. Apex claimed the technology, licensed it to competitors, and shut down the original development teams. The companies still exist, but they're shells now. Half their employees were let go within a year." Thomas felt his chest tighten. "I need to call the deal off." "They won't let you. Look at Section 12.7. Thomas flipped to the page. His hands were shaking. Section 12.7 outlined the termination clause. If Thomas withdrew after signing the letter of intent, which he had done 4 months earlier, he would owe Apex $200 million in withdrawal penalties, plus legal fees, plus compensation for anticipated losses due to deal abandonment. The numbers could create significant financial hardship. They could force him to liquidate assets, sell properties, drain retirement accounts. Even then, he might not have enough. "I'm trapped," Thomas said. Daniel closed the laptop. "Not yet." Thomas tried to renegotiate. He called Apex's lead counsel and requested a meeting to discuss minor language clarifications. They agreed to meet 2 days before the scheduled signing. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Apex's legal team, 4 lawyers in matching gray suits, listened politely as Thomas explained his concerns about Section 8.3. When he finished, the lead attorney smiled. "Mr. Harrington, this language has been in the contract since Draft 3. Your legal team approved it. Your board approved it. You signed the letter of intent acknowledging all terms. We're not reopening negotiations 48 hours before closing. I'm asking for a simple clarification, and we're declining. The contract is final." Thomas stood. "Then I'm withdrawing." The lead attorney didn't stand. "That will cost you $200 million, plus legal fees. We'll file immediately." Thomas left without another word. That night he sat in his office staring at the contract. Patricia brought him tea and sat down across from him without asking. "Tell me what to do," Thomas said. "I don't know," Patricia said honestly, "but I know you'll find a way." She'd been with him since the company had 15 employees. She'd watched him navigate crises that should have seriously impacted the business. A failed product launch in the early years. A major client bankruptcy that nearly affected them significantly. The financial crisis that forced him to take out personal loans to make payroll. He'd survived all of it. But this felt different. This felt like a difficult situation. Thomas didn't feel confident. He called Daniel at 11. "They won't budge," Thomas said. "I'm going to lose everything." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Bring me every document, every draft, every email, every revision note from the last 8 months. Why? Because somewhere in those documents is the thing they don't want us to find. And if there isn't, then we fight anyway. But there will be. People who operate like this always leave a trail." Daniel worked through the night. Thomas brought him 4 boxes of documents, contracts, emails, meeting notes, red-line drafts, financial projections, and communication logs. Daniel spread them across his dining room table and began reading. He started with the earliest drafts. The first contract proposal, dated 8 months earlier, was 31 pages. Section 8.3 didn't exist yet. The intellectual property language was simple. All current patents and trademarks transfer upon acquisition. Draft 2 expanded it to 40 pages. Section 8.3 appeared for the first time, but the retroactive language wasn't there yet. Draft 3 added it. Daniel pulled up the email chain from that revision. It came from Apex's team with a note, "Minor updates to IP language for clarity." Thomas's legal team had responded, "Reviewed and approved." But had they really reviewed it? Daniel pulled the metadata from the document. It had been sent at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday and approved at 9:12 a.m. the following Monday. 14 hours turnaround for a 60-page contract. Most law firms would have needed a full week to review changes of that magnitude properly. The fact that Thomas's attorneys had approved it in less than a day suggested they'd either been careless or overwhelmed. Neither was acceptable, but Daniel couldn't afford to dwell on that now. Daniel kept digging. He found a memo from Apex's internal team, accidentally included in one email attachment, that referred to strategic IP capture and retroactive positioning for maximum portfolio control. The language was revealing. It proved intent. It showed that Apex had deliberately structured the clause to appropriate technology that didn't belong to them. Then he found the signature page from the letter of intent. Thomas had signed it, his handwriting, his signature. Dated February 9th. But something was wrong. Daniel pulled out his phone and zoomed in on the signature. Then he opened another document, a birthday card Thomas had signed for Patricia 3 weeks earlier. The signatures were different, not wildly, but enough. The loop in the H, the angle of the tail on the G. Small variations that most people would miss. Daniel had studied document authentication in law school. He'd taken an elective course on forensic analysis of contracts. The professor had been a retired federal investigator who'd spent 30 years examining signatures for cases. Daniel remembered her saying that everyone's signature varied slightly day to day, but certain elements remained consistent. Pressure points, stroke direction, the way certain letters connected. These signatures didn't match those patterns. Daniel called his father at 2 a.m. "Dad, did you sign the letter of intent yourself?" Thomas was groggy. "What?" "The letter of intent. February 9th. Did you physically sign it?" There was a long pause. I was traveling that week. Apex needed it signed urgently. I authorized Patricia to apply my signature using the digital stamp we keep for routine approvals. Daniel sat up. A digital signature stamp? Yes, why? Because the contract says all binding agreements require original handwritten signatures. Section 15.2. Digital or stamped signatures are explicitly invalid for primary execution documents. Silence. Dad, the letter of intent isn't legally binding, which means the termination penalty clause has no foundation. Thomas sat up in bed. His heart was pounding. Are you certain? I need to verify the exact wording, but yes. They wrote the rule themselves, and then they accepted a signature they knew violated it. Why would they do that? Daniel was already opening his laptop. Because they were counting on you not noticing, or not having the resources to challenge it, or being too tired to push back. He pulled up section 15.2 and read it 3 times. It was clear, unambiguous. Primary execution documents, which included letters of intent, required original handwritten signatures. Digital reproductions, scanned copies, and stamped signatures were explicitly excluded. We have them, Daniel said. The courtroom was smaller than Thomas expected. Apex had filed for enforcement of the termination penalty 3 hours after Thomas formally withdrew from the acquisition. They demanded immediate payment and injunctive relief, preventing Harrington Industries from pursuing the 3 development projects. Thomas's response was a counterclaim. The letter of intent was invalid, the termination clause was unenforceable, and Apex's contract language constituted attempted deception through questionable IP appropriation. The hearing was scheduled for late July. Daniel represented his father. Apex brought 6 attorneys. The judge was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses. She listened to Apex's opening arguments without expression. They spoke for 40 minutes about binding agreements, business standards, and the importance of honoring commitments. Their lead attorney painted Thomas as a businessman trying to escape a deal that no longer suited him. He spoke about market confidence, the sanctity of contracts, the impact that would be felt if every acquisition could be undone on a whim. The argument was polished, professional, convincing. Then she turned to Daniel. You have 15 minutes. Daniel stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply walked the judge through the timeline. On February 9th, Apex Holdings required Mr. Harrington to sign a letter of intent while he was traveling internationally. They created urgency. They pressured his assistant to apply a digital signature stamp. He placed the signature page on the overhead projector. This is the signature on the letter of intent. Then he placed Thomas's actual signature beside it. This is Mr. Harrington's signature from an unrelated document signed the same month. The differences were subtle but visible. Section 15.2 of Apex's own contract explicitly states that primary execution documents require original handwritten signatures. Digital or proxy signatures are explicitly invalid. Apex drafted that language. They required it, and then they accepted a digital signature they knew was non-binding. Apex's lead attorney stood. Your Honor, this is a technicality. It's their technicality, Daniel said calmly, written into their own contract. The judge removed her glasses. Continue. Daniel presented the memo, the one that referenced strategic IP capture. He explained the retroactive clause. He walked through the 3 development projects and their timelines. He showed how Apex had deliberately structured the language to claim ownership of work they never funded, never contributed to, and had no legal right to control. He presented documentation showing that all 3 projects had been initiated with Harrington's own capital, developed by Harrington's employees, using facilities and equipment that Harrington owned outright. Apex had contributed nothing. They had no claim to any of it under standard acquisition terms. They didn't want to acquire Harrington Industries, Daniel said. They wanted to appropriate its future. Apex's team objected. They argued business norms, standard practices, negotiation tactics. The judge listened to both sides. She asked questions. She requested clarification on specific contract sections. She examined the signature comparison herself, asking Daniel to provide additional examples of Thomas's authentic signature for comparison. Daniel had prepared for this. He provided 6 documents spanning 3 years, all signed by Thomas in different contexts. The pattern was consistent. The letter of intent signature deviated from that pattern in multiple measurable ways. The judge took notes. Then she ruled. The letter of intent is invalid due to signature deficiency under the contract's own terms. The termination penalty clause is therefore unenforceable. Additionally, the retroactive intellectual property language in Section 8.3 constitutes overreach inconsistent with established acquisition standards. Apex's claims are dismissed. Mr. Harrington is free to withdraw without penalty. The courtroom was silent. Apex's attorneys gathered their files and left without speaking. Thomas sat still, hands folded, breathing slowly. 3 months later, Thomas stood in the warehouse where Harrington Industries had started 40 years earlier. It had been converted into a research and development facility. The 3 projects, filtration system, lightweight alloy, diagnostic sensor, were progressing on schedule. Daniel visited on a Saturday. They walked through the facility together, past engineers and technicians working on prototypes. The filtration system was in final testing. Early results showed a 92% improvement in contamination prevention compared to existing technology. 3 major medical device manufacturers had already expressed interest in licensing agreements. The lightweight alloy had passed aerospace certification standards. 2 aircraft companies were conducting field trials. If the trials succeeded, Harrington Industries would hold patents on technology that could reduce aircraft weight by 15% while maintaining structural integrity. The diagnostic sensor had exceeded every expectation. It could detect microfractures in surgical instruments before they became visible to the human eye. Hospitals were already requesting pilot programs. "You didn't have to fight this," Daniel said. "You could have taken the money and walked away." Thomas stopped. "I could have. But then what? Apex restricts the technology, patents it, locks it away until they need leverage. And 4,000 people lose their jobs when they realize they acquired a shell instead of a company." "You risked everything." "I risked money. That's replaceable." Daniel looked at his father. "Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people haven't spent 40 years building something from nothing. Money comes and goes. Reputation doesn't. Integrity doesn't." They walked past a lab where 3 engineers were testing the filtration system. One of them, a woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for 18 years, looked up and waved. Thomas waved back. "She has 2 kids in college," Thomas said. "If Apex had taken over and shut down development, she'd have been let go within 6 months. Her skills are specialized. Finding another job at her age, in this market? Nearly impossible." Daniel nodded slowly. "The signature," Daniel said. "You knew it wasn't binding, didn't you?" Thomas smiled faintly. "I suspected, but I needed someone smarter than me to prove it. You could have checked yourself. I could have. But then I would have faced it alone, and I'm too old to face things alone anymore." A delivery truck pulled up. Thomas recognized the driver, a man who'd been making deliveries to the facility for 12 years. They exchanged waves. "What will you do now?" Daniel asked. Thomas looked back at the building. "Keep building, same as always." "And Apex?" "They'll try again with someone else. Maybe they'll succeed. Maybe they won't, but they won't take what isn't theirs from me." Daniel smiled. "You know, Mom would have been proud of you." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "She would have been proud of you. You're the one who found the way out. You taught me to look for it." They stood together, father and son, two people who understood that integrity wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic speeches. It was about reading the fine print, trusting the people you love, and knowing when a signature wasn't just ink on paper, but a choice about who you wanted to be. Inside, engineers were building the future, and Thomas Harrington, who had started with 12 employees and a dream, was still standing, still building, still believing that some things couldn't be bought or sold or signed away. Thomas felt, for the first time in months, at peace.